Hey everybody, and welcome to Breaking Biotech, the podcast where we get into all things biotechnology. My name is Matt, and thank you so much for joining me today. Going to be talking about Viking Therapeutics. So, for those who are unaware, I have been talking a lot about Madrigal Pharma, and I'd been talking about Intercept, and I did mention some Gilead product related to NASH, but I had to comment on this because the data came out today. And before I go any further, please like, subscribe, or leave me a comment. So, all these companies are trying to meet an unmet need in the market for NASH or NAFLD, and both of these diseases are related to each other. There's some controversy over whether or not the fat is responsible for the inflammation, which leads to the fibrosis, or whether or not the fat is kind of auxiliary to it. I'm getting off track a little bit, but the point is a lot of companies are looking into this because there's a huge market for it. So, Madrigal Pharmaceuticals and Viking Therapeutics both have different types of drugs that are agonists to the thyroid receptor beta. And without going into the specific details of how the mechanism works, they found that in preclinical data that there's a reduction in liver fat, and it also correlates to good histological studies that are associated with improvements in NASH. So Madrigal a little while ago released their data on their phase 2 data on their MGL 3196, I think that's right, on patients, and they saw a significant improvement in reductions in liver fat and a significant improvement in NASH activity score and lots of good stuff. And so today, Viking Therapeutics came out with their phase 2 study that had a little bit of a smaller patient population, but they reported slightly better results in their phase 2 study with their VK2809 in NAFLD. And like I said, they're both related diseases, but I think the way that they had to name these trials separates them a little bit. So we'll get into it a little bit. The market reacted very positively to Viking, almost doubling the stock price up to a close of 1946. So their primary endpoint here was actually LDL-C reduction. So it wasn't even necessarily reductions in liver fat content, but obviously everybody was very excited about that given the Madrigal data. So they looked at both, and they saw that in two different dosing regimens, they got about 60% decrease in liver fat reduction, and the proportion of patients that got 30% reductions in liver fat was 77% on the once every other day and 91% once every day. So pretty impressive data. And if we compare that to the Madrigal data, which this gentleman here, David Bouts, was super nice to put together, it's a little bit better than Madrigal's drug. And, we have to use a caveat here. They used an MRI technique that's actually starting to become the gold standard of measurement for NAFLD or liver fat content. I don't know if it's going to totally replace it, but, that's part of the speculation that's involved here. But we can see if we compare the MRI results, they get a little bit of a better response, and when it comes to the percent of patients that have over 30% reduction, they also get a slightly better response with their drug, even though it should be a similar mechanism. Although some people might debate whether or not the Viking product is a more liver-specific molecule, but either way, both of these things it's great news. I think that both of them are going to be competitors with each other, which is always good for a capitalist market. The other things that they noticed in the Viking trial, no significant adverse events in either the placebo or the treatment, and there were no differences really in the adverse events at all. They did notice that the ALT or AST levels were decreased in the treatment group in the Viking trial, which was also seen in the Madrigal trial, and they saw an improvement in ApoB and Lp(a), which are markers of atherosclerosis. So I listened to the call just now, and I just thought I'd give some of my outlook. So some of the stuff that the investor relations people were asking are sort of like, where are they going after this? And the company really has to discuss with the FDA to figure out what's up. But I think what we can do is we can look at the differences in the inclusion and exclusion criteria before between this trial and the Madrigal trial to see really what sort of indication they're going to try to get. And so when we look at this stuff, it's kind of tedious, but some of the things that I noticed was that in the Madrigal group, where is that? So one of the big differences I noticed, and this is very dry, but just focus with me here. So the Madrigal trial actually selected for people that had biopsy-proven NASH. So they needed to have this biopsy within 180 days of randomization and very specific fibrosis score. So the Madrigal trial was very much specific to NASH patients. And again, these patients do have significant liver fat content, so they have this over 10% liver fat content. In the Viking trial, they don't have a requirement for biopsy-proven NASH, but they did have a requirement for high LDL-C, high liver fat, as well as assessed by MRI. So it seems like the Madrigal group, they're very much going to be able to position themselves as a NASH specific product, whereas the Viking might be restricted to only doing NAFLD. Now, when it comes to the actual hepatologist and their treatment regimen, they might look at both drugs and just pick the one that's cheapest because they both have a similar mechanism of action. But it's going to be interesting to see how they move forward with the FDA in figuring out their path towards a phase 3 trial and whether or not either of them are going to have to do the same things to get the same indications or not. So one of the things that I noticed is that that Viking is not doing a biopsy on these patients, so we're not going to actually get to figure out the histological features and see the details like we did in the Madrigal study. The only thing that we're going to get is a follow-up at 16 weeks with these patients in particular. Also, the Viking group is not interested in getting an indication for HeFH, familial hypercholesterolemia, which Madrigal is undergoing trials for as well. So there are some slight differences between these two companies, and I think it's enough to really own both if you want to get good exposure in this NASH space. I still only have the Madrigal position, and I reduced my shares a couple weeks ago when it was around the 240s, and I think it dropped quite a bit on this news, but I don't think it's all bad, and there's a lot of hype whether or not there's a buyout that's going to happen. So we'll see. But those were the particularly interesting things that I took away. I did notice, so people have been talking about comparing these companies in terms of market cap, and it's true that the Madrigal market cap at the price that it's at now is almost double, maybe a little bit more than double what the Viking Therapeutics market cap is. So we need to think about whether or not the Madrigal one needs to lower or the Viking one needs to increase so that they can both be reasonably priced in the market. So I feel like I might take a position on this. There's a couple of catalysts that we can expect. Viking also has products in. I don't have it. Yes, I do. So Viking at the end of this year is going to release data on their product for. Bear with me here. It's a. Oh man, I just forgot this. This one. Here we go. The SARM, selective androgen receptor modulator. So for hip fracture, and this data looks pretty good too. So if they get good data that comes out with this, the stock could increase much more, I think. So I'm potentially gonna put a position here. We're going to see more of the data related to NASH at the Association for the Study of Liver Disease conference on November 9th. So we're going to get more details on the absolute values of reduction and more details related to the biomarkers associated with atherosclerosis and things like that. So there are a couple catalysts coming up. We don't know too much about Madrigal. I think in their latest presentation, they talked about how they're going to initiate a phase 3 trial for NASH for their candidate drug, MGL 3196. So that's going to take quite a while to get going. I did notice that Intercept Pharma was up today on I guess, no news, but I don't like the Intercept drug, and I'm very, very tempted to short. I'll probably mention on Twitter if I actually do take a short position, but I think that these thyroid receptor beta agonists are going to be the go-to NASH drug, in my opinion. And, we have 2 independent groups now that confirm that this mechanism is a good one for humans, and it's a good sign for everybody who's suffering with NASH or NAFLD. So that's all I have today. Thank you guys very much for listening or watching. Leave me a review, like, subscribe, or leave me a comment. And with that, we're going to wrap it up, and I'll see you next time.